That morning, I stood at my fence and looked at the windmill. My family had kept turning for almost 80 years, lying broken in the middle of my pasture. Greater than Vanessa Wickham stood on the other side with her arms folded like she had done the whole neighborhood a favor. She told me the association had removed a hazard because I was too stubborn to take it down myself. I did not argue. I looked at the drive shaft cut clean in two and asked her one question. Did she know what it ran? Vanessa laughed at me. 2 hours later, her phone started ringing and never stopped. If you enjoy watching a homeowners association walk straight into its own trouble, hit subscribe and stay with me until Vanessa learns exactly what she broke. My name is Darius Boone. I am 48 years old and I live on 9 acres of what used to be a 200-acre farm. My grandfather bought that land in the 1940s when nobody wanted it and the county called it scrub. My father worked it after him, and by the time it came to me, most of it had been sold off in pieces to pay for things families pay for, hospital bills and school and a roof that would not stop leaking. What was left is called Boone Acre on every county map, and it sits on a low rise of ground with a creek at the bottom and a stand of black walnut along the north line. From my porch, I can see 300 feet of split rail fence, a pump house with a tin roof, and the hill where the windmill stood. On the other side of that fence sits Red Willow Estates, 600 homes with stone entry columns and a gatehouse nobody actually staffs. They came in about 20 years ago, took the old Howard tract and built until they ran out of room, and the room ran out right at my property line. Some of those houses cost more than my whole family has earned in 3 generations. There is a house behind me with a 4-car garage and a fountain in the front yard. And the man who lives there waves at me every morning and I wave back, and that is the whole relationship, and it works fine. Most of my neighbors are like that. They are busy people with jobs and kids and no particular opinion about my fence line. The windmill sat on the rise about 400 feet behind the house. It was a galvanized steel tower 26 feet to the platform with a 16-foot wheel and a tail vane. My grandfather painted white every few years until his hands stopped letting him climb. My father repainted it after that. I repainted it the summer I turned 30. The tower had been rebuilt twice. The gearbox rebuilt 3 times, and the wheel had new sails put on it in the late 1980s when a hailstorm chewed the old ones to lace. It was not a decoration. It was a machine, and it worked every single day. And that is the part Vanessa Wickham never once thought to ask about. Under the windmill, a vertical rod ran down inside the tower to a gearhead. And from there, a shaft assembly carried motion into a low concrete pump house set into the side of the hill. Inside that pump house, there were pressure gauges, a control cabinet older than I am, a small auxiliary generator that the mill turned when the wind was steady, and a set of valves that fed a transfer line running north under the tree line. My father maintained all of it. I maintain it now. There is a logbook on a nail by the door with entries going back to 1962 in 3 different handwritings, and mine is the sloppiest of the 3. The letters started about 4 years ago. The first one was polite in that way where the politeness is the threat. It said the Red Willow Estates Homeowners Association had received concerns regarding a structure visible from several properties, and it requested that I contact the board at my earliest convenience. I called, got a voicemail, left a message that my land was not part of the association and never had been, and did not hear back for 6 months. Then the second letter came, and it was less polite, and it used the phrase aesthetically inconsistent with community standards, which I read twice because I could not believe somebody had typed it about a water pump. Vanessa Wickham became president of the board about 3 years in, and the letters changed tone the week she took over. They got shorter and colder, and they started arriving certified. She had a way of writing that made it sound like the outcome was already decided and I was just being informed of the schedule. I looked her up once, not out of any real curiosity, just because I like knowing who I am dealing with. 44 years old, moved from out of state, sold high-end real estate before she stopped working. 3,000 square feet of house and a garden that gets professionally rotated every season. She was not a villain in a movie. She was a woman who had decided what kind of place she lived in and could not stand a single thing that disagreed with the picture. We met face to face for the first time on a Tuesday in April. She parked her car on the shoulder and walked up to my fence in shoes that were never going to survive my driveway. And she called out to me while I was clearing a clogged screen on the intake. I came down the hill wiping my hands on a rag, and she looked at the rag and she looked at my boots, and I watched her make about 9 decisions about me before I got within 10 feet of her. That is not something you imagine. When you have lived my life, you learn to see it landing. She was pleasant for about 40 seconds. She told me she wanted to introduce herself personally, that she believed in neighbors talking directly, that she hoped we could resolve the matter of the tower without anything unpleasant. Then she said the thing I have thought about probably 100 times since. She said I could live like a farmer if I wanted to. That was my choice and my right, but that 600 other families should not have to look at it. She said it in a warm voice, the way you would tell somebody. Their shirt was untucked, and she smiled the whole time. I told her the land was mine, the tower was mine, and the tower stayed. She asked what I even used it for, and I said it runs equipment. She said she understood, and I could tell she did not hear a word of it. Then she said she knew upkeep on old property was expensive and that the association had a fund for improvements in adjacent parcels when those improvements benefited the community appearance. And if cost was the obstacle, she was sure something could be arranged. She was offering to pay me to tear it down. She thought I was poor and stubborn and that the second one was just a symptom of the first. I said no thank you and went back up the hill. Behind me, she said in a voice she wanted me to hear that she would see what the board thought. I remember standing at the gearhead, listening to the wheel come around in a light east wind, feeling the shaft take up the load the way it had 100,000 times before. She had stood 10 feet from a warning sign bolted to my fence post and had not read one word of it. She never asked why a man with an old truck and a leaking roof kept a piece of 1940s machinery greased, painted and logged every 14 days like clockwork. She never asked and I never explained, and I have made my peace with the fact that I could have and did not. The board meeting happened in May in the clubhouse and I was not invited to it. But a woman named Denise who lives on the cul-de-sac nearest my fence told me everything within a day because she thought the whole business was ridiculous. Vanessa presented the tower as a community hazard. She had photographs taken with a long lens from the walking trail angled up so the tower looked like it was leaning over the rooftops. She used the phrase catastrophic failure event twice. She said the association had a duty to protect residents from foreseeable dangers on adjacent land and that duty did not stop at a property line drawn on a map in 1946. To their credit, several residents pushed back on the spot. A retired attorney named Paul Ostrander stood up and said the association had no jurisdiction over a parcel that was not part of the plant and that acting on it would expose every homeowner in the room to liability. Denise said the room went quiet and Vanessa did not blink. She said she was not proposing action on my land. She was proposing an assessment of risk to the community's infrastructure corridor because the maintenance easement for the northern utility run passes behind the last row of houses and the tower sits near it. That was the door she found. She could not touch my land, so she talked about a corridor. That distinction is thin enough to see through, but it was enough to get a vote for an inspection. And that is how I met Caleb Finch. He runs the association's maintenance crew, a man in his 30s with a company truck and a clipboard and the specific tired expression of somebody who takes orders he does not agree with. He came to the fence on a Thursday and he did the thing I respect, which is he stopped at the fence and called out instead of walking onto my ground. I waved him through. Caleb told me straight what he had been asked to do. Photograph the tower from outside my line, note structural condition, and estimate what removal would involve. He said he was telling me because he did not like being used as somebody's crowbar. I appreciated that, and I told him if he wanted to see it properly, he could walk up with me because a photograph from 400 feet away was going to tell him nothing true. We walked up the rise together. I showed him the tower legs and the anchor bolts, which I had replaced 11 years ago, and the guy wires that were tighter than most guy wires he would ever check. I showed him the gearhead with fresh grease on the fitting. Then I walked him around the base of the hill to the pump house door, and I let him stand there and read the two signs bolted to the frame. The old one is enamel and rusted at the corners and says private utility equipment off forged access only. The new one, which I put up 9 years ago, says the same thing with the cooperative's contact number under it. Caleb stopped talking. He looked at the door, then up the hill at the tower, then back at the door, and I watched him do the arithmetic. He asked if the mill was tied to the pump house. I said it was. He asked if the pump house was tied to anything else. I said it was tied to a transfer well and a booster station and that both of those served things on his side of the fence. He wrote that down. He asked me to write it down, too. So, I did on the back of one of his forms and I signed it and dated it. And he said he would put it in his report. He did put it in his report. I know he did because Vanessa quoted a different part of that same report back at me 11 days later, which means she had the document in front of her. She parked in my driveway this time, right behind my truck, and she came up the porch steps without being asked.